This series of videos introduces the 38 chapters of the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Movements. It's a project of the Social Change Lab, and we gratefully acknowledge the support of the Mary Lee Bequest for the work of our team.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Winifred Lewis. I'm a professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Queensland.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Zeng. I am a psychologist and a research assistant in University of Queensland.
Hello. My name is Shu, and I am an undergraduate psychology student at the University of Queensland.
And we are all here to talk about the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Social Movements, and in particular, Chapter 2, which has the title, Environmental Movements in Western Europe, from Globalization and Institutionalization to a New Model of Radicalization in the 21st Century. And the author is Sylvie Olitreau, and she is a French researcher, a senior researcher from the, sorry, could have clicked through to that. I'm a senior researcher at the French National Center for Scientific Research. And she studies green activism and is a sociologist by training. So this really is a big sprawling chapter, and I learned a lot about the environmental movements in Western Europe, which are covered by the author all the way back to the 1700s, right, Andrea?
Yes. So
tell us about that first wave, how the environmental movements started to form.
So the first part of the chapter really focused on how environmental movement originate in Western Europe. So we are looking for there is a awareness in the Western people in Western Europe and how they shift their view about the relationship between people and the environment around them. So in the 17th and 18th century, there is a tendency that people view their nature as the service of humanity. So the nature either serve as a material for people's life, or either as it has a beauty or beauty resources or benefits to benefit the people.
It was really about trying to preserve nature because it was beautiful or because it increased human health at first, wasn't it? It was really focusing that way.
Yes, it is. So it's more like we are using the environmental as like we are using it as a resources instead of we are equal, like human and the nature. And there is a turning point in the 19th century when the movement of romantic started, and we kind of see the nature as a different way, and instead of seeing the nature as something we exploit, we kind of need to preserve them and avoid them to be polluted and like negatively affected by the industrial and the pollution from the urban society.
Yeah, that's right. I guess at the time too, they were building all the factories of the Industrial Revolution. There's so much pollution, like literally destroying rivers and poisoning people as well. So it's kind of really obvious that something was going wrong, and it started these new conservation movements. And I guess that was the theme that continued in the second wave of environmentalism, wasn't it, Shu?
Yes, correct. So the second wave of environmentalism is marked by a period of institutionalization post-World War II. Now, as you may recall, World War II was filled with all sorts of regional and transnational conflict in Europe and also internationally. And after the war ended, various organizations came out of woodwork. They are transnational and regional in character. And alongside these, we saw the birth of various international bodies dealing specifically with the environment, such as International Union of the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN in Switzerland. And from there on, environmental conservation became the agenda of not only these international bodies, but within various regional bodies as it becomes increasingly politicized from local governments all the way up to international treaties between countries.
Yeah. And at the same time, there was a sort of protest movement, wasn't there? People were increasingly aware of how the environment was being affected, and themes like anti-nuclear or anti-whaling or anti-pollution mobilized people in the streets.
Indeed, and if you recall from the first part where resources and survivalism are key components of this underlying movement, these two became politicized and the mobilization of public opinion became more relevant to each and every citizen or person involved. And as a result, from the 1940s onwards through to the 1960s, people became increasingly vocal and mobilization is possible due to the dissemination of information via the activists in these organizations and large mass gatherings, protests, and educational seminars.
Yeah, and I
And
think that's
yeah.
one of the themes of the book. The third kind of section deals with these international NGO networks. And the author's really making 2 points, I think, that one is that, you know, NGOs starting in Western Europe, like especially the World Wildlife Federation, have played leadership roles all around the world in mobilizing for conservation. And another point was how quickly, as early as the 60s, international NGOs like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth were starting local chapters and mobilizing people around some of these themes within Western Europe. So already the regional character, as you say, is like growing within an international context that is really important to recognize, you know, from the beginning. And I guess like the last section really deals with the new movements and this sort of tension between government action and radicalization, right, Andrea?
Yes, so the last part is about the civil disobedience, and it covers radicalism and also the actions that with the trends in institutionalization. So this the civil disobedience is a way that people take when there is unjust or there is a tension in the situation that ignores the rights of a minority or a group. And it
It's something that's become a feature of the environmental movement, isn't it? I mean, you look at groups like Extinction Rebellion or Fridays for Future, and both, of course, starting in Western Europe, have really embraced civil disobedience and tactics.
yes, it is tactics that is used like commonly used in many situation, like when people protest under pressure, and you can commonly see it in animal rights protection and also in climate change when people are protesting for to get public attention.
I think that was probably one of the themes that I learned most from the book, from this chapter, because it is chapter 2. It's the first kind of substantive chapter in the handbook. The first chapter is just an overview of the whole book and its structure. And so this was really the first one, and it's really, you dive straight into the historical complexity, the political complexity, and I really appreciate this tension between, on the one hand, the last 200 years have seen more and more government action, these big institutions that have formed to take action, like the IUCN. But on the other hand, there's also a growing sense that we're not moving quickly enough and that ordinary people have to try and put more pressure on. It's really interesting. I mean, I think I learned quite a lot about Western European environmental movements that I didn't know. And I think it's a really solid foundation. What do you guys think? What was your take home from the book, from the chapter, Andrea?
I just feel like I learned so much from like the historical events that originate with regarding environment movements in Western Europe. And I just see there is an inspiration from the historical events and what we can learn from them and apply to our current environmental movement. That is, we can try to get more young generations to get involved. And also we need more support from the expertise of science and education so we could learn more and keep this environmental movements transforming and keep growing and keep to get more people involved and become more a inspiring collective events.
That's awesome. What about you, Shu?
From reading this chapter, it seems to me that environmentalism and how everything so far has come to what it is today, they're all influenced by the spirit of the times in which the world finds itself in, from the economic scarcity post-World War II to the anti-establishment and counter-capitalism movements in the 1960s, all the way up to today, when we are faced with the dangers of global warming and the fear that governments are just not doing enough to maintain or prevent this from happening. And what do we see right now? We see all levels and all layers of society reacting, be it from the grassroots level or at institutional levels or even transnational movements.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I think one of the things I most appreciate as well with the book is just beginning to put our social, psychological, and psychological perspective into that political and sociological context. So yeah, it's great. Well, thank you, Shu and Andrea, for participating in the recording. And thank you to our viewers for being here and watching us. Bye now.
For those of you watching, be sure to subscribe and follow us at Social Change UQ, and check out our website for more videos.